My name is Daniel Harris. I was born in a small town in Kentucky, and like many young people of my generation, I grew up dreaming of serving my country. I enlisted in the U.S. Army at 19, full of ideals, convinced that courage and duty would be enough to face whatever lay ahead. But no training, no amount of drills could have prepared me for the reality of war. This is my story.
Have you ever wondered what truly keeps a soldier standing in the middle of the hell of war? It's not just the weapons, not only the discipline, and certainly not the medals. Sometimes it's something simple, almost invisible to the eye, yet powerful enough to keep a man from giving up. I stood face to face with death, surrounded by the heavy silence of war and by the longing that consumed me with every sunrise. I even thought about giving up, letting it all end right there, without fighting anymore. But days before that moment, something unexpected reached my hands. A letter. It wasn't just any letter, but a letter from my mother. And that letter changed everything. It gave me the strength to go on, and in many ways it saved my life. But let me ask you, have you ever thought that a simple letter, a gesture of love, could change the entire course of your story? Before we dive into this emotional story, I want to ask you something important. Many people watch the videos on this channel, but they don't subscribe. This ends up discouraging us and makes us think about stopping. So, if you enjoy real and emotional stories like this one, subscribe now and turn on the notifications, because here you will find stories that touch the heart and make you reflect.
My name is Daniel Harris, born in a small town in Kentucky. And like many young men of my generation, I grew up with a dream of serving my country. I enlisted in the U.S. Army at the age of 19, full of ideals, convinced that courage and duty would be enough to face whatever was waiting for me. But no amount of training, no number of drills could have prepared me for the reality of war. The desert felt endless. The nights were cold, the days burned like fire, and the silence between the explosions was the hardest thing to endure. It wasn't just the fear of the enemy or the danger of ambushes. It was the loneliness that seeped into our bones, the silence that made us think too much, and the emptiness that came when the memory of home hit harder than any bullet. I used to carry a picture of my mother in my breast pocket. She was my anchor, the person who taught me about resilience long before I even knew what that word meant. She worked 2 jobs after my father left, raised me and my younger sister, and never once complained. Her strength was the kind of strength you don't see in the headlines, but the kind that keeps families alive. But in war, even memories lose their power when the days stretch into months and the weight of the dead begins to suffocate your mind. I started to question why I was there, why I kept fighting in a land that wasn't mine, for people I would never meet. There were days when the thought of giving up, of letting fate decide, felt almost like relief. One night, after a long patrol that ended in an ambush, I watched one of my closest friends, Corporal James Miller, die right beside me. We had laughed together just hours earlier, talking about his fiancée back home, the wedding he was planning, the life waiting for him. But with a single shot, that life vanished, and all I could do was hold his hand as he took his last breath. I felt something break inside me that night. I thought, what's the point? Who's next? Maybe it should be me. The days that followed were darker than I can put into words. I walked through the desert like a shadow, doing my duties mechanically, eating without tasting, sleeping without rest. I wrote letters back home, but tore most of them apart before sending them. What could I say? That I was losing myself? That I didn't know if I'd make it back? And then, just when I was drowning in that darkness, a letter arrived. My name written in her familiar handwriting, the envelope smudged as if it had traveled through storms just to reach me. I remember holding it in my hands, my fingers trembling, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say. But when I finally tore it open, I swear I could hear her voice with every word. "Danny," it began, the name only she ever used. "I don't know what you're going through out there, but I do know my son. I know the man you are. You have always carried more strength than you realize. When your father left, you were just a boy, but you stepped up and helped me with your sister. You were only 12, but you carried the weight of a man. I see that same strength in you now. Don't you ever believe you are alone, because I am with you in every step you take, in every breath you breathe. And when it feels too heavy, remember that you are not just fighting for a country. You are fighting to come home, to come back to the ones who love you, to me. And I will be here, waiting for you." By the time I finished reading, my tears had soaked the page. It was as if the letter had pulled me back from the edge of a cliff I hadn't realized I was standing on. For the first time in weeks, I felt something stir in me, a reason to keep going, not for medals, not for glory, but for her, for the promise that if I survived, she would be there. The next days were still hard. Nothing about the war changed. We still marched, we still fought, we still lost brothers. But something inside me had shifted. I began to write her back, not with despair, but with hope. Every word I put on paper felt like a bridge between me and home, between the man I was becoming and the boy she remembered. That letter saved me, not just because it reminded me of her love, but because it reminded me of who I was, a son, a brother, a man who had reasons bigger than war to survive. The letter from my mother became more than just paper folded inside an envelope. It became my shield, my compass, the reason I woke up every morning determined to take one more step. I carried it inside my vest, close to my heart, and every time I touched it, I felt as if she were holding my hand across oceans and deserts. But war doesn't pause for personal miracles. A week later, our unit received orders for a high-risk operation. Intelligence suggested that an enemy stronghold was hidden deep within a village that had been abandoned months earlier. The orders were clear: move in, secure the area, and clear the threat. It sounded straightforward, but we all knew nothing about war was simple. Every mission carried a weight, and this one felt heavier than most. That night, before we left, I read my mother's letter again. Her words reminded me not only of my duty, but of the life that waited beyond the battlefield. I folded it carefully, placed it back against my chest, and whispered to myself, for her, for home. The operation began before sunrise. Dust clung to our uniforms, and silence hung like a warning in the air. As we approached the village, my instincts screamed that something was wrong. The streets were too quiet, doors and windows shut tight, as if the buildings themselves were holding their breath. Then it happened. A deafening explosion tore through the morning as an IED detonated just feet ahead of us. The ground shook and 2 men were down instantly. Chaos erupted, shouts, gunfire, the sting of dust and smoke filling our lungs. I dropped behind cover, heart pounding, ears ringing. In the middle of the chaos, I thought of quitting, of lying still, of letting the fire swallow me. But my hand instinctively touched the pocket where her letter rested. That single gesture snapped me back. Her mother's voice echoed in my mind. "You are not alone. Come back home to me." And so I rose, firing, shouting orders, pulling my brothers from the open ground into cover. The fight raged for what felt like hours, though in truth it was less than 40 minutes. When the dust finally settled, the stronghold was cleared, but at a price. 3 men were dead, and among them was Sergeant Thompson, the man who had trained me from the first day I arrived. His loss cut deep. He was more than a superior officer. He was like the father I had lost years ago. That night, as we regrouped, I pulled out my mother's letter again. The ink was smudged from the sweat and dust, but the words were still there, unshaken, unbroken. I realized something in that moment. Survival wasn't just about me. Every decision I made, every act of courage was tied to the men beside me, to the people waiting at home, and to the promise of living a life worth all this sacrifice. But the war wasn't finished with me yet. Days later, during another patrol, we came across a group of civilians trapped in a warehouse, being used as shields by insurgents. It was the kind of situation that forced us to see the worst of humanity. The civilians were terrified. Women, children, elders. Their eyes spoke of hunger, fear, and despair. Our orders were to fall back and wait for reinforcements, but waiting meant risking their lives. Something inside me wouldn't allow that. I remembered my mother's words, "You are stronger than you realize." Strength didn't mean surviving at all costs. It meant using whatever courage I had to protect others. I volunteered to lead a small team inside. We moved quietly, step by step, and in the tension of that moment, every breath felt like a prayer. We managed to neutralize the threat, and one by one the civilians walked free into the open air. I will never forget the way a little girl clutched my hand, her eyes wide with gratitude. She couldn't speak English, but she didn't need words. That look said everything. It was then I understood what my mother's letter had really given me. It wasn't just the strength to survive, it was the strength to keep humanity alive in the midst of inhumanity. To fight not out of hatred, but out of love. To see faces, not enemies. To remember that even in war, compassion has a place. Yet, despite that clarity, the nightmares didn't stop. Every night I saw the faces of those we lost. I heard the cries, the gunfire, the silence afterward.
I woke up drenched in sweat, clutching my mother's letter as if it were the only thing anchoring me to reality. In many ways, it was. War changes you. It strips away the illusions you once held and forces you to confront who you really are. Some men hardened into stone, others broke completely. I feared both paths, but with that letter I chose a third way, to remain human, even when everything around me tried to turn me into something else. As weeks passed, our unit faced more missions, more losses, more impossible choices. Each time I faltered, I returned to those words written in my mother's careful handwriting. Her letter became my scripture, my lifeline, reminding me of what truly mattered, not the medals or recognition, but the promise of going home, of keeping the love alive that had carried me this far. And sometimes I wonder, what would have happened if that letter hadn't reached me? Would I have given up? Would I have made reckless choices that ended my life? I'll never know, but I do know this. Her words became my salvation, a lifeline that kept me fighting when I had nothing left to give. And now, as I share this part of my journey, I want to ask you, what words, what memory, what person would keep you standing in your darkest moment? If this story resonates with you, don't just pass by. Many of you watch these videos and forget to subscribe, and that silence hurts more than you imagine. Subscribe now, leave your comment, and share this story, because sometimes the smallest act, like a letter or even a click, can change everything.
The day we received the news that the war was ending felt surreal. I remember sitting in the dusty barracks, staring at my mother's letter one last time before I folded it carefully and placed it in my pack. After months of explosions, silence, and loss, the thought of going home seemed almost impossible, yet deep inside, hope flickered, carried by the words she had written months ago. The journey back was long and exhausting. We traveled through desolate roads, past landscapes that had witnessed too much suffering. Every mile I traveled, memories of my fallen comrades flashed before me. I thought of James, Sergeant Thompson, and the countless others who had given everything. I carried them with me, in my heart, like a silent promise that their sacrifices would not be forgotten. When I finally stepped onto American soil, my knees shook and my chest felt too tight to breathe. I was free, but the war had left marks I couldn't erase. I carried scars, both visible and hidden, and memories that would haunt me forever. Yet, in the distance, I saw her, my mother, standing at the airport, eyes scanning every face, searching for mine. The moment our eyes met, the world narrowed to just us. I ran toward her, ignoring the stares, the noise, the chaos of the arrivals hall. She threw herself into my arms, and I felt an overwhelming rush of emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Tears streamed down both our faces as I held her, as if trying to pour every lost moment into that embrace. Her letter had promised a reunion, but nothing could have prepared me for the intensity of finally being home. In her arms, I remembered the nights I had doubted myself, the days I had nearly surrendered to despair. And I realized something profound. Survival is never about facing the enemy alone. Survival is about the love that waits for you, the hands that hold you when everything else fails, and the promises that remind you why you must keep going. We went home together, driving past streets that seemed too ordinary to contain the weight of my experiences. My mother spoke little, but her presence said everything. In the quiet of our home, I finally allowed myself to weep for my friends, for the lost, for the boy I had been, and the man I had become. I began writing letters back to the families of my fallen comrades, sharing memories, gratitude, and the knowledge that their sons, brothers, and fathers had not died in vain. Each letter was a small act of redemption, a way to honor those who had given their all. My mother watched, silently proud, knowing that her words had guided me to this path of healing. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a fragile normalcy. The nightmares remained, but they no longer ruled me. I joined veteran support groups, shared my story in schools, and spoke at memorials. I realized that the story of a single letter could resonate far beyond one person. It could heal, inspire, and remind others that love is stronger than despair. One evening, sitting with my mother on the porch, I pulled out the letter she had sent me during the war. I traced her words with my fingers, feeling the same warmth and hope that had carried me through the deadliest days of my life. She smiled, knowing that the simple act of writing had saved not just my life, but it had saved my soul. Looking back, I understand now that the war did not define me. The people I loved did. The sacrifices were terrible, the losses unbearable, but the love that awaited me at the end gave meaning to every step, every heartbeat, every tear shed on foreign soil. So I ask you, in your life, what is the letter, the word, the person, or the memory that keeps you moving when all hope seems lost? Sometimes it is the smallest gestures, the simplest reminders that carry us through the darkest storms. I will never forget those I lost. I will never forget the terror, the blood, the dust, or the fear. But I will also never forget the power of a mother's love, a letter that crossed continents, and the promise of a home that awaited me. That promise kept me alive. That promise brought me back to the light. If you felt the weight of this story, don't let it end here. Subscribe now to this channel, share it with someone who needs hope, and comment below with the words or memories that keep you standing in your darkest hours. Many of you watch these stories but don't subscribe, and that silence takes away the chance to reach more hearts. Your engagement matters, and together we honor every story of courage, love, and survival.